Let's talk about inflation. Now, this loaf costs $3.40 at the local supermarket. In the 1980s, when Kylie was topping the charts, this guy was PM, and the world got its first Apple Macintosh. A loaf was counted as 4 pounds of bread, or about 2 kilos, and it would have set you back just 54 cents. So plugging all this into the calculator, the per gram price of bread is now 526% higher than it was back in the 80s. That's way more than it should be. That loaf should be costing us $2.45, according to the average inflation rate over the past 40 years. So that means the humble loaf of bread is actually a symptom of a much bigger problem. These days, there are 3 words on everyone's mind: cost of living. You've probably noticed a big part of your household budget has gone through the roof. It's for fuel. Using the average price of E10, you'd be paying $114 to fill up a 55-litre tank. A year ago, you would have paid about $75. That's a $39 difference, or a huge 52% in just 1 year. How much we pay at the pump comes down to the price of crude oil. When the cost of oil goes up, so does the price of fuel. And we can see pretty big spikes on this graph. And this right here is when Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, Russia is the world's 3rd top supplier of crude oil after the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and supplies about 1/3 of Europe's needs.
As some of the lockdowns started to unwind, there's been an increasing demand for international travel again and transport. Right at that time, when the demand is picking up as well, supply has been disrupted. And since we import most of our fuel and oil, we're seeing that at the pump in Australia.
The problem with higher fuel prices is that it causes a domino effect. So anything that needs to be delivered by land, sea or air also then goes up in price. Now, here's a graph showing inflation over the past 10 years. Usually, the Reserve Bank aims for a number within the 2 or 3% range to achieve strong and sustainable growth. Officially, inflation is 3.5%, but it looks like it's only going up from here.
We've got ongoing price increases globally, so we're likely to see certainly CPI, I think, with a 5 in front of it, and it may even go higher than that. The risk, of course, is that as prices go up in one spot, they flow through to other spots.
What's interesting is that the cost of things we need has gone up much faster than the cost of things we could maybe do without. So think of the difference between food, fuel and childcare versus a new phone or new clothes. In economist land, they call that non-discretionary and discretionary spending.
They are things that people need to buy effectively. With other things, maybe you can substitute to a lower priced good or service. But with essentials, you don't really have much choice.
In the last quarter, the inflation on essentials was more than double that of non-essentials, and that's been true over a longer period of time as well. This is what it looks like on a graph over 15 years. But even that higher figure for essentials doesn't stack up to what we're actually seeing at the supermarket today. For beef mince, this time last year, you would have paid $11.50 for a 500 gram pack from Coles. Now, the same product is $13. That's a 13% increase. That celery you picked up for your green juice is costing you $5.90 for a bunch, instead of the $3.50 you would have paid this time last year, and that stacks up to a 70% increase in cost.
We've seen obviously in Australia floods where transport costs for food have gone up significantly. We've had this issue with fertiliser globally, a global shortage. You add to that mix, of course, what's happening in Ukraine with the Russian invasion. It's a big producer of food. That's also adding pressure to food prices.
Many Australians don't really know what it's like living with high inflation. In the 1970s, it got as high as 17%. One of the reasons it stayed so low since then is China. Around the 1990s, almost everything we wear or use started being made over in China. It meant lower prices, allowing banks to keep cutting interest rates.
You know, we opened up our borders, we opened up trade, and those competitive pressures have kept prices down. So we've seen things like clothing and footwear, for example, a lot lower prices than you would have paid comparatively 30 years ago.
Now, all this would be fine if you actually got paid more to keep up with the price hikes. Problem is, you're not. Annual wage growth is about 2%. There's still a long way to go to catch up with inflation.
In Australia, wages have been mostly stagnant for the past 10 years.
There's a number of reasons for that. We have the public sector. Governments have put a real cap on wages. There's less competition in terms of less pressure for private sector companies to increase wages to match the public sector. And then we've also seen a real drop-off in enterprise bargaining.
And just to complicate things even more, even talking about higher inflation can make it come true. So if people start expecting higher prices, they adjust their habits.
So expectations can change behaviour. If people expect prices to go up going forward, they're going to bargain for higher wages to match that, to try to keep their purchasing power high. It can also change the timing of purchases. If you think that something is going to be more expensive in 3 months' time, well, there's an incentive to go out and buy it now.
So how do we get ourselves out of this spiral? Well, we're in election season, and elections are typically when you see cash being splashed around. But sending money through the system can actually end up making things worse.
So the sort of things we don't want to see are one-off payments, particularly to households, particularly of a value that will really increase demand for goods and services across the economy. It will mean the Reserve Bank has to move earlier and faster in terms of interest rates to keep inflation under control.
If you're giving checks to households who are really feeling like their budgets are being squeezed, and it enables them to just buy the same amount of goods but at this higher price level, you might not have the same kind of inflationary effects as broad-based cash for everyone.
So interest rates are the best tool that we have. When the Reserve Bank raises interest rates, it makes borrowing more expensive for the banks. The banks then pass that on to their customers, who end up paying more to borrow money. So you might think twice, for instance, about buying a car if getting a loan would be just too expensive.
What we'll see the Reserve Bank do is a slow increase over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. They'll want to make sure that they don't cut off economic growth while still making sure that they're sort of keeping that inflation in check.
But it's worth having a bit of perspective. Compared to other countries, we're still doing pretty well to keep inflation under control. In places like the UK, the US and Germany, inflation is up about 6%, and it's getting worse. But that's little comfort for anyone here who's feeling the pinch. Fuel, food and other price increases, like buying a car or building that new house, the list just goes on. And we're left wondering, just how bad is it going to get?